let's face it, there's some frustrations that you and we all have to face in the cattle industry. You breed a cow, it takes 9 months for it to have a calf. There's a limited amount of bulls that you can have on your property, and a limited amount of bulls you probably want to have on your property. And this can cause frustration when we're trying to get better genetics in our herd and replicate good genetics fast. But today we're going to be talking about the importance of reproductively efficient cattle to play a role in your herd's profitability. Spoiler alert, it's the foundation of your herd's profitability. And different reproductive tools that we can use to harness quality genetics that we may not actually have within our herd and replicate quality genetics that we do have in our herd faster. Infinity Cattle Services, owned by Chris Shivers, is glad to be a sponsor of the Cattle Innovation Station podcast. Infinity Cattle Services, a unique, vision-driven, service-oriented company committed to developing successful revenue-producing cattle operations, is a full-service consulting and marketing firm specializing in Brahman and Brahman-influenced cattle. Contact them today to learn more about how they can assist you with locating cattle, cattle mating, sale management, marketing, communications, record keeping, data submission, and a wide array of other services. They can be reached at 713-202-1747. Again, that's 713-202-1747, or at infinitycattleservices@gmail.com. That is infinitycattleservices@gmail.com. Visit their website at infinitycattle.com or check them out on Facebook and Instagram. It's time for another episode of the Cattle Innovation Station podcast, where we keep you current on beef cattle industry events, help you innovate your herd to turn a profit, and help innovate the beef cattle industry so we can feed more people on less land. I'm your host, Baxter Whitworth, and today I'm joined by Dr. Joe Madk. Dr. Madk, how are you today?
I'm great, Baxter. How are you this morning?
I'm doing good. Well, Dr. Madk, what can producers expect to learn about today, and what is your expertise in?
Now, I think that, Baxter, today we're going to talk about reproductive efficiency in the beef cattle herd and how reproduction really affects the bottom line. Here at Stephen F. Austin, I teach classes in reproductive physiology, animal breeding and genetics, livestock evaluation, teach classes in ag leadership as well. And so hopefully, taking back from my experience in the beef cattle industry, raising beef cattle myself with my family, my wife and daughter, hopefully can give some stuff that where people can understand. It's things that we talk about every day, but sometimes we forget about it when it comes to reproduction.
Yes, sir. So I guess the first thing that we want to talk about is the baseline, and that is, what is reproductive efficiency, and how does why is it important, and how does it affect profit?
Well, I think, Baxter, when we look at just reproduction in general, it's the primary driver of profitability. In a cow-calf operation, if a cow's open, she brings nothing to the table at the end of the day at weaning time. And so, open cows are zero revenue to the herd. And then with that, there's still, those open cows are still eating. They're still, getting, protein supplementation if you have that, or mineral supplementation. They're still getting, forage supplementation during the wintertime. But at the end of the day, those open cows are not doing anything for you. And so I would say that, every increase by 1%, when we talk about a preg rate at time of preg check, is significant to the bottom line, in those cows that have been exposed by a bull. And so as we start to talk about, more calves on the ground, then basically, those expenses are cut across a little bit different sector. And so I would say the biggest thing is, an open cow is a cow that needs to be culled.
So we'll get to cooling in a little bit, and that's a great point that you bring up. I'm glad that you brought that up. So when it comes to reproductive efficiency and what we're looking at in cattle, how fast do we want cattle to be getting bred back after they've had a calf?
So that Kevin interval to me, Baxter, should be about 45 to 60 days. And, a lot of things are going to play a part in that. And especially and we're going to talk a lot today, I know, about body condition score and nutrition. And, we can keep those cattle going into, that third trimester at a 5 or 6 in body condition score. When she calves and starts lactating, she has enough nutritional value there to keep a body condition score up, where then in that 45 to 60 days postpartum, she's rebreeding back. And so, the name of the game is a calf every year. And 9 months, we've only got 3 months to get her rebred back. And so I think that it comes back and, to a lot of those things, not just the cow side, but the management side as well.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And I think that's an important thing also, because I've heard it said that if a cow isn't feeding at least two animals at one time, then she's not being profitable for you. So when we talk about cattle that are superior in their genetics and that are helping our herd be more profitable, a lot of times we like to think of tools that we can use to help replicate those genetics. So what are some tools that you think are most beneficial, or even tools that can help us grow the genetics of our superior quality cattle?
Well, I think, Baxter, when we look at seed stock producers, we stop and we talk about progressive commercial cattlemen as well. There's three things that probably come to my mind when we start talking about accelerated progress through reproduction. Number one, that's AI, and that's artificial insemination. We talk about embryo transfer, or the conventional embryo, where we're super ovulating the cow and then, retrieving those embryos at day 7. And then, a newer technology, which is not new any longer, but one that, I think we get a lot of progress out of as well, is in vitro fertilization, and pulling those oocytes out of a cow and fertilize them in a petri dish and then implanting them in a recipient, at day 7. And so a lot of those things, I think anytime that we can try to get more offspring from an elite female, that's going to help our herd. And I think that, those things that come into play, or those tools, are beneficial, but we also have to make sure that we're using them to the best of our advantages.
Yes, sir. That makes sense. And so you mentioned AI as one of those tools, and we'll get to the other ones in just a second. But when it comes to AI, what are some of the great advantages that it can implement in your herd? I know obviously it allows you to buy genetics from a herd that or from a or outsource genetics that you might not necessarily have in your herd without having to purchase a bull. But what are some other advantages that it has for your operation?
Well, I think, Baxter, you hit on that top one, and that top tier deal is where that we can analyze, or we can go through semen catalogs, or deal with different breeders and buy genetics in a straw. Buy the spermazoa that is actually going to affect us and move that cow herd and, to a different level. I think the other thing it does is it allows us, when we start talking about cavities, we talk about growth, we talk about carcass traits. Maybe the bull that we're using right now is not, the highest in IMF or marbling or ribeye area, or whatever you want to say. But then all of a sudden we can go out and we can buy semen on a bull that has those traits, and we know, being highly heritable, that we can pass that on. And the other thing, Baxter, I think that we're really starting to see now, and out there in some literature, and starting to see some articles, growing up in the cow business, I was always kind of around people that thought, well, go find a low birth weight bull to breed your heifers to, because that first calf is going to be, sold at the sale barn, or we're going to get rid of that first calf anyway. Well, I think with the invention of sex semen has really put on something different. We can now buy sexed heifer semen, and knowing those calves are going to probably be a little smaller, be a little bit more petite about their shoulders and head, And we can breed our heifers to more sex semen now, and we're not so worried about just, the birth weight. We're worried about still cavities. We're still worried about those traits, but it's the phenotypical traits that we can look at in EPDs and genomics that help us select the right bulls. And now that first calf heifer is producing a calf that can be just as superior, as a 5 or 6 year old cow can.
That's interesting. That's a very interesting take I've never thought about before. How the sex semen can also not only help your your cash flow if you're especially if you're main selling the main thing you sell is heifers, but also lower the birth weight of your cattle where you're having to focus less on that. That's an interesting point. So when we're talking about AI, something that we like to talk about, or something that is really the main driver of this podcast, is profitability in the cattle industry. And so I want to know, can AI, if you're selling semen yourself, can it help benefit you as bringing in more cash flow throughout the year?
Well, sure it can. Those top sires that you have, that you can market. We have the best marketing tools now with social media. When we use social media to our advantage, especially when we talk about marketing, we can start selling semen that, that's an extra benefit. And we know that I do quite a bit of international work. And so there's a lot of international buyers that can purchase semen that they can ship to other countries that can't normally ship maybe a live hound, or they can't, they don't have the ability to have that. And so I think that, having the availability of collecting our bulls, we've got so many good places around now that collect bulls that we can store in liquid nitrogen. And then all of a sudden, now that's another profit source for us. Are we going to make a lot of money? It just depends on the bulls. But I think it gives us the opportunity to share genetics through rancher to rancher and still at the bottom line, kind of take a little bit of that, profit back from the bull side.
Yes, sir. That I think that makes sense, and it's in the cattle industry where it can be kind of hard to generate cash flow throughout the year. I think that's a great opportunity if you have that available to you. But so we've talked about a lot of the benefits of AI and how it can help you increase cash flow, lower your birth weights, and just help you increase the quality of your herd. But is there anything that we need to watch out for when we're using the artificial insemination technology, or things that we need to make sure that we're doing that it's not damaging our herd instead of helping it?
Well, I think one of it's not really a drawback, but it is one of those factors out there is it's labor, it's a labor cost. Getting those cows up, if we're going to use extra synchronization, if it's a 7-day protocol or 7+7 or whichever protocol we're using with, GnRH and prostaglandins and a cedar implant, now we've got extra labor cost in bringing those cows into the chute. And I think we need to be very careful. Especially when we're using an implant gun for cedars cow to cow, that we're making sure that we're disinfecting that applicator. I think the same way as when we're AIing these cows, making sure that we're doing the best thing we can possibly to, keep any type of microbiome out of that cervix, feces or whatever, keeping that, uterus as clean as we can. And so I think some of those, those practices of using, a clean gun, a clean sheath, a clean glove, making sure that we're making sure that those cattle are as clean as they can be prior to going in vaginally to keep down any type of infections. And so, but I would still say that it's one of those technologies that's really safe to use. I think we just have to take the process of in the protocol of making sure that we're as clean as we can be and making sure that cow is clean as well. And I think it just takes care of some of those other issues that you're mentioning.
Have you been looking for a place to buy top quality AI sire semen or collect a bull of your own? Well, look no further than Elgin Breeding Services. Located in Elgin, Texas, Elgin Breeding Service is not only one of the best breeding services in the business, but also has superior customer service. Contact them at ebsbull@elginbreedingservices.com or by phone at 512-285-2019. Again, that's 512-285-2019. And visit their website at elginbreedingservice.com. Have you been looking for Brahman cattle with a good genetic background? Contact 79 Cattle Company, selling reliable Brahman replacement heifers, Brahman show prospects, and Brahman bulls. Contact Taylor Tate at 210-241-4511. Again, that's 210-241-4511. Or contact Mallory Tate at 210-861-0155, 210-861-0155.
Yes, sir. And so I want to make sure that producers know that when they're using AI, obviously, what is the conception rate with AI?
Well, you're probably looking at it depends. That goes back to, that technician putting in the semen. I think it goes back to the person that's watching, the estrus cycle as well. We've got tools out there, EstroTech patches. We've got, there's a product out on the market right now that we're doing some research here at the university, 701X ear tag. Looking at estrus sync, looking at the estrus cycle as well. And so I think that, as long as we are taking care of business and making sure that those cattle are in good estrus, I would say conception rate should be 80% or better. But you're going to have those situations where cows are going to be, for as long as I've been AI-ing cows, there's some you're not going to get bred, that's got difficult cervix. Maybe their ovulation is not at the same time that you think it should be. And so we're going to have some of those deals. But I would say that, using a technology that's saving having a bull on your place, that's tearing up water troughs or tearing up feed troughs or gates or whatever, it helps you out. And I think the other advantage that people need to know about Baxter as well is, trying to define and really hone down their breeding season. And so if they're using AI and they're breeding those cows that, on AM PM rule at 12 hours after the onset of estrus, and then we know about 18 to 21 days later, they'll come back into estrus, we can kind of start tightening up our overall calving window as well. And so I hope that answers the question you're looking for.
Yes, sir. And so you mentioned that using AI can allow you to not have a bull on your operation. But for most operations, do you think that is a smart move? And obviously it is for some, because I know of operations that do that. But do you think for most that's a smart move, seeing as you said that the conception rate for AI is around 80%, which leaves 20% of your cows to possibly not get bred?
So you're really kind of thinking about Baxter, that looking at not having a bull in your place. Is that kind of where the answer is, or the question is?
Yes, sir. So my question is, even someone that wants to utilize AI heavily, should they still keep a bull around to clean up those cows so that they have a closer to 100% conception rate?
Yeah, I always, the guys that I consult with, and even some projects that I have going on here, research projects I have going on at university, I still keep bulls around. Because at the end of the day, just as we started this podcast, Baxter, the number one cost thing in the beef cattle industry, in my opinion, is when we have open cows. And so even though we have a tough time, trying to get some of these cows bred, or maybe, the technician wasn't right on that morning, or maybe we have an issue with the semen quality, there's a lot of things out there. And then all of a sudden we've got a bull that we can put out after AI, to kind of clean those cows up, they were more apt to get closer to that 100% of cows bred. Now, I'm not going to say that we're going to have 100% at preg check or whatever, but there's always issues. But I think it's still a smart move if you can keep a bull around and then have a place to keep him during that AI section or session of time, and then turning back out. You and I kind of visited a little bit, and I think we're going to talk some about breeding seasons and keeping bulls out all the time. And I think that, you have to look at what does your operation or what can your operation sustain? Do we have place to keep bulls? Do we have places to keep those bulls out of the way from the cows? But to answer your question really directly, yes, I still believe that a person if they have the ability, they should have a bull on their place or have the access to a bull they can put out after the time of AI.
EP Cattle Company. Owned by Eddie Wilson, EP Cattle Company is home of Sir Rao's Handshake. Rao's Handshake is a sound-structured, heavy-muscled bull that is really bold-ribbed. So it comes with no surprise that he is a Fort Worth and San Antonio Junior Show Division Champion and Rio Grande Valley Open Show Division Champion. He is a grandson of BRC Noble and JDH Shank Manso, and is also a great-grandson of Mr. H. Elijah Manso. You can contact Eddie Wilson or Nicole Wilson on Facebook at EP Cattle Company. So remember, if you're looking for some well-performing, registered Brahman genetics, contact Eddie Wilson on Facebook.
Are you looking for high-quality hay that is priced well? Then make sure to visit Threadgill Hay Company. They have fertilized horse jigs and Tifton 85. They carry square bells and round bells. Their square bells are $8 a bell, and their 4x6 round bells are $50 per roll. That's a nice price and good quality. They're located outside of Mount Enterprise, Texas, and they will gladly give you more details when you contact them. Speaking of contacting them, you can reach out by texting Sawyer Poole at 903-646-4741 or Ronald Threadgill at 903-235-2011. Yes, sir. That makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that. So I kind of want to move into a few of the other technologies we've talked about, specifically IVF and embryo transfer. So how do you think either of those technologies can benefit someone's herd?
Well, if as I teach in animal breeding, when we start to really recognize what our breeding plan is for a year, we're not affecting the cow and the bull. We're affecting the next generations. And so we've always got to be looking at how do we improve the next generation. And I think ET and IVF are those ways to get multiple offspring out of one female. And so, we start talking just the IVF, or excuse me, ET. We flush the cow, we get multiple embryos. Those embryos are raised in that cow for 7 days. Then we flush them out, and then we put them in a recipient cow. And, I think that those eggs might, I don't know the literature on it, but, maybe they're a little stronger than IVF because they were grown in the cow. I don't know. But I know this is that technology allows us, to get multiple offspring. I'm not a guy that thinks that we need to flush every cow. I don't think every cow or every heifer, that wins the county show is a donor prospect. But I do think that those superior genetics that we have in our herd, we can use this technology to get further away from it, away from, kind of status quo. I have a philosophy on my own place. This is just Joe speaking. I don't flush a cow till she's had a calf, or maybe I'd like her to have 2 calves. I want to see how can she raise a calf first. However, some people, they flush cows as virgin heifers, and I'm okay with that. I think every operation is different. I think it goes back, Baxter, in my opinion, when we start looking at these type of technologies, it's about marketing. How do we market our genetics? and how do we stay profitable? And so if we want to accelerate genetics every year, that's one of those technologies. I think IVF is started something or has been one of those technologies that have really helped us, especially when we look at a female that once she's maybe a virgin heifer, maybe a heifer that's already bred, that we want to collect oocytes out of, that gives us that opportunity to think about that, because it goes back to marketing. If you've got a really nice heifer or a really nice cow, and you have a customer that calls you and say, "Hey, I would really like to buy 20 embryos," and you say, "Well, the cow's bred. You're going to have to wait another 9 months or whatever before I can do that." As long as that track is not over around the pelvis, we can go in there and we can collect oocytes and we can grow those embryos. And once again, that goes back to your point about, how do we get profit throughout the year? And so IVF has allowed us to do that. IVF has allowed us to, grow those in a petri dish. It's also, allowed some people to use less semen. I think there's a debate out there if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but IVF gives us that opportunity to generate and accelerate gain throughout the year with that technology. And the other thing I think is really important is, we've all had that special cow or that, or special heifer, and for some reason something happens to her. you know, if that cow dies or something like that, there's a protocol. You can work with your veterinarian. You can work with, repro centers to harvest those ovaries the way that they need to be harvested and get them there. And there's a possibility of still, trying to collect oocytes out of those ovaries after that time. And so I think that's another one of those advantages that we have with IVF. But once again, I think we got to use it smart. We don't need to produce a lot of bad ones. And that can sure happen because of, the fastest way we can use it. But I think if we use it to our advantage, we look at the global marketing that we have in our own operation, and I think that's where it really helps us.
Yes, sir. So you have talked about differences between IVF and ET or conventional ET. Can you kind of give some examples of if this is kind of how your operation works, you might want to lean towards conventional embryo transfer, whereas if this is how your operation works, you might want to lean towards IVF.
Well, I think Baxter, it really goes back to that cow. And, there's going to be some cows that aren't going to respond good to embryo transfer after they've been, flushed several times or several years or what have you. And then we have the opportunity to go in and, collect and retrieve those oocytes through IVF, because they're still there. But maybe she's not responding to a superovulation drug any longer or hormones. And then all of a sudden, we don't have the advantage to use an ET. I think sometimes we can look at ET as probably a lower cost than IVF, because just the numbers we're going to get and the cost of retrieving those embryos and implanting them, they're just not going to be as much. I think sometimes people will say that, conventional ET can be more predictable. I don't know if I really buy that or not. I think, every cow is a little different. I will tell you personally, we've got a cow that, we've never done conventional embryo work on her. I've only done IVF, and she produces unbelievable. And so I've had other cows that, they're not as good. And so I think that, it really depends again is where those what are your priorities, I think, is where it really goes to, and how do you want to either select for genetics or pass on your genetics or sell your genetics. I would say that IVF, if you're looking for higher numbers and you're looking at something that you can do more often, because of the oocyte retrieval, we can do it more often than we can do superovulation in regular embryo work. And so I would think it would just be, how much do you want to do? And the other big advantage, I think, with IVF, not to beat this horse to death, but I think is the variability of being able to separate those oocytes in different petri dish and be able to use different bulls, in fertilization of those oocytes to make embryos. And so, I think that gives us a different advantage as well. So I really think it goes back to your management style, your herd needs, and also your marketing needs.
Yes, sir. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe another advantage to IVF is that by utilizing IVF, your semen is most likely, unless there's an issue, going to take to those oocytes, correct?
Yeah.
And so by utilizing IVF, if you're using expensive semen, then that's a kind of a more guaranteed way that you'll get a calf, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think too, Baxter, it gives us the opportunity, as I mentioned, to be able to cut that straw under nitrogen, keep it frozen, and only thaw out a portion of it that we would need, and not having to utilize a whole straw, because we know that it doesn't matter what breed you're in. It doesn't matter, what we're talking about now. Semen costs have gotten expensive. And so if we have that really special straw semen, there's the technology out there that we can cut it, and utilize, even parts of it and not having to, thaw that whole straw. And then it goes back to, like you said, in conventional AI, I've got to be able to get that cow bred. And so, that AI technician or the embryo technician that's actually breeding that cow, 7 days prior, has got to be on their game as well. And so it does give us an opportunity, to be there and, to have probably a little bit more success overall.
Yes, sir. Well, I do want to talk about, because we've talked about IVF and ET as well as AI, and there's also natural breeding, which is just running the live bull on the cattle. But in which scenario do you think we should use IVF or ET versus AI or versus natural breeding? Which scenarios do you think those work best in?
I think it goes back to profitability. Profitability increases when we start to use different technologies, and we match those technologies with our operation goals. Um, you know, there's a lot of times that we can run bulls on cows, if we're very disciplined, and it works just as good. We buy the right bulls, we match the right bulls. I know producers and some that I've worked with and some I work with right now on some projects, that they're 100%, bull bred cows. But I think they're very disciplined, into, when they put the bulls out, when they pick the bulls up. And so I think it goes back more than anything is matching the technology to your operation. If we look at natural service, that's the lowest labor cost there is. We put a bull out, bull does his job, and in all reality, in 45 to 60, 45 to 90 days, however long your breeding season is, you pick the bull up. You're going to get the least amount of genetic improvement out of that scenario if you're not replacing and buying new genetics to fit your cow herd or to fit your needs. The other thing that you have to worry about there is injury of those bulls. Is a bull going to get injured throughout the breeding season, reproductively, throughout, genitalia issues? Does he have a bad foot? Does he have a corn? Does he break a toe? And then the bull comes up lame and he's not breeding cows. And so, and then the other issues that we have sometimes is infertility in these bulls. And so natural service, sometimes 100%, yes, low labor costs, but we've got to be, I think, visual. And we still got to be with those cows to make sure the bull has the libido, however you want to say it, to get up and move, and get those cows bred, as well as making sure that, if there is a bull that's not moving a lot, if you're seeing him under the shade tree or you're seeing him in the pond during breeding season, is it an issue? And so I think that, there's where we have that. We talk just AI versus some of these other technologies. I think it's the best balance when we talk about cost and genetic improvement. It's a lower cost to AI, and you get that genetic improvement, but it requires a lot of management and timing, to get these cows bred. I'm very fortunate, Baxter, that I have a wife that's been married to me for a long time, that's really good at catching estrus in cows. She also AIs, my daughter AIs. So we have 3 people at our house that can actually thaw semen and put it in a cow. Now, when it comes to those bad cervix cows, who do you think is going to get the phone call that needs to get them bred? The guy that's been doing it the longest. However, you have to make sure, especially in AI, do you have the ability to do it, or do you have a technician that you can call? Because there's times that I breed cows at 3:00 in the morning because they come into estrus at 3:00 in the afternoon. And so I think those are those things that, it's a low cost, but it gives you some genetic improvement. But then you have that management and the timing part of it. IVF, ET is the highest, genetic acceleration of your herd, because we can do so much in a year. It's, a higher upfront cost. It still goes back to, that management of time. But I will tell you, in my opinion, and the people, once again, that I work with, those seed stock producers and those really progressive commercial cattlemen, because I work with one that's really progressive. He's a commercial cattleman. All his cattle go to a cell barn facility, but they're grouped together and everything. But he gets a lot of benefit with IVF. And so, but he's progressive and he wants to make sure those calves are where they need to be. And so, to sum all that up, I'm going to go back to where I started, Baxter, and I'm going to say that profitability increases when we mix technology into our management decisions.
Yes, sir. So I love the point you made of matching the technologies with the goals of your operation and with your operation, because not every operation is at the same level of growth. Not every operation has the same goals, or even operations that might have similar goals and are at a similar stage of growth might have be in a different environment and have things that are different within them. So I love that point, and thank you, Dr. Mask. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Cattle Innovation Station podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you learned something from this episode, make sure to follow this podcast as well as liking and rating this episode and podcast. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep innovating the cattle industry. Signing off.